having me and for organizing this. So we sit out here or do we sit in the audience?
Right here.
Lovely. Thank you.
Dat had moeten willen.
Hát szerintem neked nem adtam
Az aktualitását megjelentett.
Szia, hogy vagy? Nagyon jó.
Emmanuel, the deputy director of the Institute of Sociology.
Nice to meet you. Thank you. Thanks for hosting us.
Gyere ide. Gyere. Jó.
Excuse me. Yes, I'm ready.
Igen.
Tépjek meg egy lapot is.
The channel for free English, one French.
Okay. So one for English, two for French, three for Hungarian. Don't ask me about it.
Sorry.
Can you manage the situation?
I will try. I will.
No. You have to. Yes.
Edit. Hogy kapcsolod fel? Jó, meg nincs víz. Köszönöm szépen. Aha. Jó.
I suggest we start. I'd like to thank you, first of all, for your presence coming from either the parliament or much farther afield, Budapest or elsewhere. We will have participants connected from a distance. They couldn't make it to Strasbourg, but they have nonetheless said that they would willingly participate. I would like to thank Professor Droit for two things. First of all, for having co-organized this meeting and for his expertise. Professor Droit knows Central Europe well, its history, its politics. And I'd like to thank Sciences Po Strasbourg for hosting the event. We have subdivided this debate into three parts. First of all, an analysis of the results. How do we read, understand the results? I've just been interviewed by a Hungarian TV station, and there are various ways to understand the result, but I can not be certain. Obviously, that's difficult. But maybe you will be able to explain. The second part of the debate will be about the more profound reasons of political developments in Hungary, this latest vote, the latest elections, but also sociology, the rule and divide, etc. And in a third and last part, we will look into what Hungary might become in the near and far future. What will be Hungary's relations with Europe, and more fundamentally, we will be asking you whether, to your mind, Prime Minister Orbán, the new, not so new Prime Minister Orbán, is right to say that his project for Hungary is not one for the past, but is very much something anticipating on the future. I'll moderate this debate. It shouldn't be difficult in view of the high quality of our guests. I'll be moderating the first debate, the analysis of results. My first question is about the opposition strategy. Was it the right strategy? Second question, whether the opposition or the oppositions rather, should they keep to their unity and united front, or should they rather go their own way and become independent again and have their own respective programs more in keeping with their historical roots? We have 4 guests for this analysis. I'll first give the floor to a political analyst, Kristóf Gáspár, who's present here with us. And then I'll give the floor to 3 representatives of 3 different parties to react. Márton Gonzi, István Szent-Iványi, and Gergely Arato from Jobbik, Socialist Party and Democratic Coalition. Kristóf Gáspár, I'll give you the floor first. And you have 5 minutes.
Köszönöm szépen, először is itt lehetek ezen a mai eseményen. Amit elsőként mindenféleképpen leszögeznék.
Thank you very much, first of all, for having invited me to this exchange of views. First of all,
Magyarországi történelmi
in light of Sunday's elections, I think it's fair to say that they were historical elections for Hungary. Never any party won so clearly in elections. No party ever lost as much.
Szintén, hogy a Fidesz bármilyen másik választási
rendszerben is többséget szerzett volna. Ez egészen biztos. Really, in all electoral systems, Fidesz would have won.
És ez alatt az idő alatt megváltozott a választási rendszer is.
And it's been winning for 12 years. The electoral law has changed over the 12 years, and Fidesz is still there. The Prime Minister remains the same, that is to say, Mr. Orbán. To reply to your question, in the Hungarian electoral system, the way it was introduced by Fidesz, there are problems with distortions, lack of balance, which can give rise to additional strength to the dominant force, the dominant party in the system. It's been like that since 2010, and it's been like that for Fidesz since 2010 under Mr. Orbán. It's a very, in this time, a novel approach implemented by the opposition was to unite opposition parties, a coalition, United for Hungary as it's called, and liberals, left-wing and right-wing voters would have liked this union to win. This was already the case in 2018, because in 2018, during the last parliamentary elections, Fidesz nonetheless won the elections in the individual vote and on the national list.
Látva azokat, hogy ez a stratégia ez megbukott, ez ebben a formában a mostani választáson nem tudott
So the opposition strategy is a failure, and unfortunately, once again, a united opposition didn't produce a positive result to lead it to victory.
Akár a választási kampányban elköltött pénz, akár
a választási szabályok,
akár pedig mondjuk a médiához való hozzáférés tekintetében,
de az feltétlenül hogy Fidesz mindenhol, Budapesten is, fővárosban, illetve vidéken is, ahol klasszikusan inkább ez a párt az erősebb, tudta növelni a szavazói bázisát, míg az ellenzék mindenhol csökkentette. Because majority and the opposition didn't have the same financial means, but the number of voters who in the end voted for the united coalition has lost a number of votes. It was difficult to believe in victory in such a situation, and this is due to three main factors. First of all, the leader of this opposition, Péter Márki-Zay, who comes from a small rural town, who simply didn't have the standing of a strong national leader and therefore wasn't able to attract sufficient voters. Second reason is that parties simply didn't keep
részben egy radikális
szélsőjobboldali pártra szavaztak át az emberek,
részben pedig a Fidesz erre, egy harmadik részét pedig otthon maradt egyszerűen, és a harmadik tényező az pedig egyértelműen az, hogy ez a stratégia egy ilyen háborús helyzetben nem volt kifejezetten, Fidesz sokkal jobban tudta kezelni ezt a válsághelyzetet, sokkal jobban kommunikált, és nagyjából ezek azok, amik
obvious crisis situation due to the war in the Ukraine that obviously never pleads for a change in government, and therefore a win for the opposition. Thank you, Mr. Gáspár. So the opposition leader as such may have been a problem. One reason. Second reason, many of the voters simply didn't follow the logic of this coalition. And then there's a third reason, the war. The war. We have representatives from three political parties present, and will now obviously ask them if they share Mr. Gáspár's analysis. Starting with Mr. István Szent-Iványi from the Socialist Party.
Köszönöm szépen. Itt vagyok, igen, köszönöm szépen a meghívást. Sziasztok, kedves kollégák, és elnézést kérek, hogy én
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much for inviting me, dear colleagues. I'm really sorry.
Azt a megoldást, excuse me? Do you have any
problem? I have to speak from my car.
We can hear you. Go ahead. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me? Is it okay?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Szóval először is elnézést kérek, hogy nem onnan, ráadásul a kocsiból jelentkezem, de
first of all, I do apologize for having to connect from my car to your conference. After this baffling defeat, I've decided that it was not possible to hide from our voters. So all afternoon, I've been available for discussions with voters in Budapest, in public, and now I have just tried to move away from the crowd, and I therefore sit in my car to try and exchange with you.
De engem az
to try and say
foglalkoztat
something
leginkább, hogy
more or different
megértsem
than analysts do after I defeat, I would say that what I'm interested in most is really to understand the majority of voters in Hungary without any criticism. If they made this choice, if they decided that they want Viktor Orbán to govern, if they want the system, then there is a reason, obviously. It's difficult to criticize voters. And it's important to understand the real profound reasons. As you heard a moment ago, whatever the electoral system, there is nonetheless always a large majority which still votes for Viktor Orbán or Orbánistan, as I tend to call
Ez egy
it.
nagyon fontos kérdés, mert ahhoz, hogy Magyarországon
it's an important issue to really understand.
Bal oldalról, mások jobb oldalról, azon tudjunk gondolkodni, hogy
in Hungary, working for our country, either representing the left or the right, we reflect about how to construct, foster democracy, how we can not be satisfied with having just 2 million votes. We need to understand the rest of the country and their profound motivations. That's something that we need to accept. Self-criticism is in order, and I'd like to ask our experts and everyone else, for that matter, to really truly understand that an election is not a phenomenon limited to a single day. It's something that occurs over a much larger time frame. When you're faced with a political system with several political parties, you can never just expect opposition, regardless of the nature of the opposition, automatically have a higher, a better result, because most voters follow the government's approach. Putin has been re-elected several times. Lukashenko won the elections. Of course, we're not entirely comparable. I see reactions, and they're quite natural. But in a way, it's true. Academics and others who try to understand this election and who reduce it to a battle between the alliance of the opposition and the prime minister need to understand that that is not the entire truth. I think others might mention it as well. So what the OSCE says, we know as well, is the fact that during elections in Hungary, there was no fairness in the elections, that the party in power was in a much more comfortable situation, that the campaign budgets were not comparable either, their presence in the field much wider as well. And if you can lead a majority of electors, of voters, to believe that Brussels is trying to punish Hungary because their government doesn't support transgender campaigns in preschools, and that is the government's official position, and that is how the government actually explains why the rule of law in Hungary is being criticized.
Last sentence. Az, ahol érdemi félelmet lehet azzal gerjeszteni, hogy az ellenzéki pártok jönnek, akkor másnap magyar katonák gyermekeinket küldjük az orosz tankok elé, az ukrán frontra, és ez a hivatalos kommunikáció nekünk sok mindent kell változtatni.
Message from the government, and then you have a major political problem. Self-criticism is in order, but we also have other problems. And the interest of Hungary is to build a true democracy, which is not possible with Orbán. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you. Please stay if you can, because I've been struck by one thing you said. Perhaps you don't have it, but you didn't give an explanation. What you say is a factual, perhaps sad finding, but it's not really an explanation. Can you stay with us? Perfect.
Now, to you, to Martin, your name is very difficult for a French guy.
Just like most Hungarian names.
Wow. John Josie?
John Josie.
Oh,
Oui.
not too bad, not too bad. So, my colleague, because Mr. John Josie is a member of the European Parliament.
On n'a pas le son sur Zoom. S'il vous plaît, mettez le son dans la salle. On n'a pas le son sur Zoom.
D'accord, c'est moi le fautif?
Vous avez coupé votre micro, monsieur.
J'ai coupé le micro.
Ah, voilà.
C'est bon maintenant. C'est bon maintenant.
D'accord.
Seems to be working now. Should I start from the beginning?
Oui, s'il vous plaît, oui.
Yes, please.
On donne la parole à Monsieur John Josie.
We'll now give the floor to Mr. John Josie, who is an MEP and is a member of the UBIC party. You have the floor.
Nagyon szépen köszönöm én is a meghívást Guetta úrnak és Droit úrnak.
Thank you. I also want to thank you, Mr. Guetta and Mr. Droit, for having invited me to this debate. It's an extraordinary opportunity for us. Why? Well, simply because you have to come all the way to Strasbourg to be able to talk with a Fidesz MP around the same table. It's a small compensation, but nonetheless, to be sitting around the same table with a Fidesz member of parliament exchanging with us. Unfortunately, during the electoral campaign, this kind of exchange, this kind of debate didn't take place. Prime Minister and members of the parliament obviously were shying away from this sort of exchange. Since 2006, the Prime Minister simply doesn't participate in electoral debates. It's quite exceptional to note for a democracy where this is normally not possible. In all democratic countries, voters want to hear exchanges between candidates, including prime ministers, when they're campaigning. They want them to participate in political debates, to convince, to win the trust of voters. But since 2006, Mr. Orbán has steered clear from any and all electoral debates. Of course, we've heard many electoral slogans, we've heard catchy phrases, but we know very little about his political platform in health, family policies, education, society at large. We know very little, if nothing, about the program. Mr. Guetta has asked a number of questions, namely about the opposition strategy and was it the right one? Well, since 2018, movements and parties, and my party, which I represent here, Jobbik, after the parliamentary elections in 2018, had the largest number of seats in parliament, the biggest political group. We were the winner, albeit in the opposition. Now, why are you asking this question, Mr. Guetta? Why didn't we hear the voters' voice? Well, the electoral system is such in Hungary that there's a two-thirds majority rule. My predecessor here now explained that everything converged towards Fidesz. The electoral code is such that it's near impossible to change the party in power, namely Fidesz. Because when we mention a very important criteria of elections, which is the fact that elections need to be free and fair, well, then you don't obviously criticize the voters. But were the elections free? Are the elections fair? Well, health and safety of voters are protected, but when it comes to public media outlets, every 4 years, there are 5 minutes of airtime available to each of the opposition candidates, which is by and large the Russian model. It's a Russian prototype. There is an information war that has been waged, a war of disinformation rather, and that's the way because of the system in place. Sorry to interrupt you, I'm an MEP, but I'm also a journalist. And as a journalist, I'd like to react and say that I understand that you want to criticize the Prime Minister, but you lost. In your party, more specifically, has lost a number of voters. Why? So were you in the end right to go for this coalition? Will this coalition outlive the elections or not? Yes, my party, Jobbik, has been much criticized. In 2018, 1.3 million voters voted for us, and half of them left us. But at the time, the Jobbik movement in 2018 and the Jobbik party of today are hardly comparable. After the extraordinary defeat in 2018, when Fidesz won this landslide win of a two-thirds majority, the then presidency of Jobbik simply resigned and jumped ship. And after that, our party came to the conclusion that it needed to develop into a Western rule of law state. That's our basis. It's true that there are many divergences, but Jobbik wanted to be included in this united opposition front. Fidesz, which is a right liberal party, but then I'm on the right too. But there is still a difference, and I don't agree with the Fidesz line. We are more in the British tradition of political pluralism, exchange of ideas and honest debates, and obviously transparency. Fidesz, on the other hand, is not really in favor of any of that. I accept criticism, and it's right. We have lost a lot of our voters, that is true, but the left, the parties on the left, also, unfortunately, in a lot of places where people had been voting for left parties for 30 years, votes have been lost as well. It's difficult for me to give you the reasons for this astounding defeat here now, but we've come a long way. The Liberals the Greens, and left parties, and us, we all managed to pool our forces in such an extraordinary unity for this final battle, perhaps even a final war. We managed. How? How did we manage? Well, because we took a political decision, a historical political decision. We lost voters, but we'll win them back.
Thank you for being so honest, because you just gave us a really important piece of information. Your party wants to keep going, to keep evolving politically. And of course, it is quite an important event for the political future of Hungary. You could have said, well, we made a mistake. Let's go back to where we came from. You are not saying that. So thank you for that information. And let me be honest with you, I'm quite glad to hear that. Personally, I don't know if that's right or not, but I'm glad to hear that. Now let's move on and give the floor to Gábor Erőss from the Democratic Coalition with the same questions. Was it a mistake? Shall we keep going?
Köszönöm szépen a lehetőséget. Megpróbálom 9 rövid pontban összefoglalni
I will try to answer in 9 quick points.
Az első ezek közül az, hogy az első 3 pont arra vonatkozik, hogy mik voltak azok a körülmények, amik kívülálltak az ellenzéki összefogáson. Az első ezek közül az a fajta világ, amit a Fidesz épített ki.
First point, the world created by Fidesz, just as my colleagues said beforehand, is a closed world from a media point of view. A lot of money, of public money, is spent for Fidesz propaganda. The reform of the electoral system was done in order to put the party in power in a more favorable situation, and all the votes that were casted outside of the borders are not well controlled, also in the interest of Fidesz. So we had no chance of beating Fidesz, but it didn't mean that Fidesz was going to win it all, and especially that it was going to win with such a big majority. Indeed, according to the polls, well, and now we can wonder if those informations are reliable. According to some polls, the opposition could have reached majority in several constituencies. Second point, reasons linked with Fidesz.
Mindazoknak, akiket 12 évig kutyába se vett, elkezdett pénzt osztani, nyugdíjasoknak, megszüntette a fiatalok adófizetési kötelezettségét, családosok számára visszafizettek az egész tavalyi adót. Ezzel egyébként egy elképesztő lukat vágottak költségvetésbe, mert a kiadásokat, a fölösleges kiadásokat nem fogták közben vissza. De kétségkívül ez egy közvetlen és direkt szavazatvásárlási mód volt. Minden ilyen intézkedést
of the nation, but it was a way to buy votes. In February, in March, they spent more than ever before for those family. Third reason is the Russian aggression in Ukraine.
Szóval a harmadik ilyen elem, ez a ukrán orosz támadás volt, amit a kormány ügyesen kezelt. Magyarország egy nagyon pacifista ország, mi minden világháborúból vesztesen és szörnyű veszteségekkel kerültünk ki. A magyar emberek nem akarnak háborúba kerülni, és a Fidesz propaganda ügyesen festette le valószínűleg az ellenzéket háború pártinak, hozzáteszem, ehhez is természetesen jelentős részben kormányzati eszközöket és pénzeszközöket használtak föl. Orbán Viktorral teleragasztották az egész országot, mint a béke őrével. Természetesen még egyszer mondom, közpénzből és kormányzati pénzből. Mi az, amit az ellenzék nem csinált jól? Először is a központi ellenzéki kampány fókuszvesztett. Úgy gondolta, hogy az ellenzéki szavazók megvannak, és a Fidesz szavazók megnyerésére törekedett, de számos alkalommal elmondta a miniszterelnök jelölt, hogy a hozzá hasonló kihagyott Fidesz szavazókat kívánja megszólítani.
the candidates,
ez nem működött, ők nem jöttek, viszont az ellenzéki szavazók elvesztek. Másodszor egy olyan országban, ahol rendkívül sok embernek vannak szociális problémái, rossz állapotban van az egészségügy és az oktatás, igazából a szociális kérdések, az egészségügyi kérdések, az oktatás nem került a kampány középpontjába, emiatt tartalmilag sem tudtak a választók azonosulni az ellenzéki választók az ellenzéki miniszterelnök-jelölttel. Harmadszor pedig
content, the voters could not follow the opposition and their campaign.
Sok ellenzéki szavazóban is
megindult az abba vetett bizalom, we have to admit that there were a lot of voters from the opposition that really lost their trust. They couldn't believe anymore that the candidate for the prime minister position was the right person to rule the country. So I am on the western side of Budapest, and in my constituency, I have met many voters during the past few weeks, few months. Many voters who said that they did not want to vote for the candidate. And last point on that topic, what can we do? Well, we have to keep the opposition united. Unity did not lead to our defeat. No, it was the fact that we didn't have a good political product. The political path we chose was the wrong one, not the unity. There were a lot of positive elements, and the campaign had never been that intense in the constituencies, at least not since 2010. So that cooperation between the opposition parties has to be based on a program, a clear proposal for the country. Ninth point, that program has to come from the left, center left, with clear promises that is directly grounded with the daily life of voters. Thank you. Thank you for being so clear, Mr. Arato. Many points really stick out. I would like to talk about 2 points that really struck me. The political path was wrong, not the fact that you tried to unite yourself. And second point, the program that we now have to create has to be from the left. So that's quite interesting. And it's also very interesting and relevant for other opposition forces in other countries, for example, in Poland and the upcoming elections. Now, let me give the floor for the second chapter to Emmanuel. Thank you, Guetta. So you saw that in that first panel, our guests really accentuated the structural imbalance and the imbalance linked to need challenges, and the question of leadership was also tackled. So we will try to go a bit more deep in that analysis of the results, and we will try to find keys to interpret that analysis that are not maybe based on the content of the program. But as you know, elections are set in a context, in a space, in a territory, in a social space too. And what is at stake here? Oh, I forgot to change the camera angle. Thank you. So, what we'll talk about here in that second panel. So, I will now work with binomes, and my first question will be for Gábor Erőss. He is also a researcher in human and social sciences, and he is also working for the Green Party for Hungary in Budapest. And I will ask him the same question as Bálint Ablonczy, who is a journalist for Válasz Online. So my question for both of them, first of all for Gábor Erőss and then for Bálint Ablonczy.
My question will be about and interpreting key for the electoral behavior of the voters. And maybe some French people here will recognize themselves in what we will be talking about here, because we have French elections coming up this weekend. So spatial opposition between big cities, dynamic, cosmopolitan metropoles that are open to globalization, versus outer countryside spaces that feel like they are the losers in globalization. So one of the keys to understand that those results, could it be that opposition, maybe a bit simplified, but let's start the debate on that. So that's opposition between the big cities and the countryside or the spaces at the outskirts of cities. So if that's the case, is it a specificity for Hungary, or could we maybe reflect more on that opposition that would be relevant for other democracies in Western Europe and in the Western world in general? Now, let me give the floor to Gábor Erőss, who is live from Budapest, and then Bálint Ablonczy. Good morning, good afternoon, rather, everybody. So yes, indeed, the analogy is quite striking. The analogy between the results that were split in different social classes, both in Hungary and in other Western countries. So, to simplify things even more, Fidesz voters are Trump's voters. They are voters who voted leave in the Brexit referendum. It's the voters who will soon vote for Marine Le Pen. It's the yellow vests. It's the RPE voters in Austria. And there are many more examples. Yes, indeed, there is that opposition between cities, champions of globalization, and also maybe even more important, cities that really have the highest level of higher educated people. We can call that the middle class, but that would be only if I wanted to go in the very detail of the social structures here. But what's for sure is that there is such a phenomenon, and it has even accentuated during that election. So, 2 points. First point, us, the opposition, has also, we have also lost cities, but in each big city, we always see results that are quite high for the opposition. Even for the cities we have lost, we see that the opposition went further. Et que effectivement dans les zones périphériques, the outskirts of city, it's quite the opposite. Dualité s'est accentuée. So that opposition has accentuated even more in the US, for example, from election to election. But there's another opposition in Hungary that could be important and that I should mention. It's in the regional position, so between the western side and the eastern side of the country. Well, it's not something that you will see at first glance, because Fidesz has constituencies where the party is quite strong, both next to the Austrian border and next to the Romanian or Ukrainian or Slovakian border on the eastern side. But globally speaking,
les régions
in
les
the
plus
western
durement
part of the country,
frappées par la
so
désindustrialisation
the
après
regions
la
that
chute du
have been
communisme
hit the
notamment,
hardest by
et
deindustrialization
les régions
after
qui
the
sont
fall
les
of
mêmes qui
communism.
sont celles où il y a
So,
une très importante
and in the regions
minorité
where there
tzigane,
is a big
un
Roma
chômage de longue
minority
durée,
presence and problems
une
of
vraie
long-term
misère.
unemployment
Donc, dans
and
les
the
régions
real
du nord-est du pays, notamment,
poverty.
c'est là que
That's the regions
non
of the
seulement Fidesz est
northwest
très
of the
fort,
country.
mais
That's where
l'opposition
Fidesz is quite
a
strong,
été,
and
enfin, la
where
chute de l'opposition a
the
été la plus brutale.
downfall
Et
of
donc,
the opposition
les deux
was
phénomènes, et
the
l'électorat, enfin, il
West.
y a aussi le
So
phénomène
those
de la
are the
volatilité de
two
l'électorat.
phenomenons.
Donc, plus vous avez un
And
CSP
there is
élevé,
also
plus, enfin, moins
the
l'électorat est volatile et
fact
l'inverse.
that
Et donc, c'est dans ces
the
régions-là
voters
du nord-est
can
notamment qu'il y
change
a
their
cette
minds a lot,
volatilité
and
liée au
in
niveau
that
d'éducation, au
region
niveau
there is
CSP
really a big
plus
difference
bas
with the
des
education
populations. Donc,
level that
ces
is a
trois
bit
phénomènes, si vous
lower.
voulez, se sont
So
conjugués pour produire ce
those three
résultat où
phenomena
effectivement
together produced
les
results,
circonscriptions les plus
results in
à
which
l'est,
the
nord-est, les plus rurales
easternmost and
et les
northeasternmost
plus
and the
éloignées des
more
grandes villes et où il
rural
y
and the
a la
further
plus
away from
forte
the big cities.
minorité
All those
tzigane,
constituencies,
où
also those with the
les
biggest
gens
Roma
sont les moins
minority, and where people
informés, enfin qui ne s'informent que
have the least
dans
access to
les médias
information, or
d'État.
when they only have access
Voilà,
to
c'est là
state
que l'opposition
media.
a
Well,
été
that's in those
la plus
constituencies that
faible.
the opposition had the
Je ne sais
worst
pas si je peux encore
results. I don't know if I
ajouter
can
une chose,
add
c'est que
something, just one
en
thing.
fait, parce qu'il y a eu aussi des vrais, enfin, des achats de vote. Donc, très concrètement, au début, des gens ont parlé, des participants ont parlé de ces...
We already talked at the beginning
de cette élection truquée. Effectivement, il y a plusieurs façons de le faire, les médias, la propagande,
and there are many
il y a
ways to
aussi
do
le
that through
phénomène
media, through
de l'achat
propaganda,
de vote.
indeed. But
On l'a
buying
vu,
votes is
y
also a
compris
thing.
dans
We saw that
un
happening,
arrondissement de Budapest, qui est le
including
mien,
in some districts in
dans les
Budapest,
quartiers où
in
il
some
y a beaucoup de chômeurs,
districts
beaucoup de
where
misère.
unemployment is high
On a
and
poursuivi
poverty is
toute la
high.
journée des gens qui
People were
achetaient des votes et amenaient des
we
gens
followed people all day, people who were buying votes, who were taking people to the voting stations, and we knew what they were doing. We documented it, but
ce biais aussi
we didn't manage to catch them red-handed. But
mais aussi
there's
de
that
ce
problem of
même électorat qui, sans
votes,
forcément
and
vendre
that same
savoir ou
electorate,
son vote,
even if they don't
très sensible à
outright
la
sell their
propagande et
vote,
en
they
faisant
are very
campagne
sensitive
en province,
to propaganda. And when I was campaigning in rural areas, I saw that some Roma families and other families actually living in poverty are now believing that we wanted to send the Hungarian youth to Ukraine to wage war.
Et qui pourtant seraient les premiers bénéficiaires. Et là, je corrige un petit peu
ce qu'a dit mon collègue
Gergely.
And
il avait
now
raison,
let me correct
la campagne
what
n'était
my
pas suffisamment
colleague said, Gergely. Yes, indeed, the campaign was not
de gauche. Bon, personne ne lit les programmes. Donc, par exemple, ces familles-là, très concrètement, et je finis là-dessus parce que c'est trop long, ces familles-là, très concrètement, on leur a promis, et c'était dans le programme, de doubler l'allocation familiale. On leur a promis de baisser l'impôt sur les bas salaires. Donc, très concrètement, il y avait des vraies promesses qu'on aurait tenues, évidemment, électorales, qui auraient favorisé ces travailleurs pauvres et ces chômeurs et ces familles pauvres, mais ça n'a pas suffi pour contrebalancer cette propagande mensongère et l'achat direct de
when
vote
faced with that propaganda and people buying votes, Thank you, Gábor Erőss. There is also a historical dimension that we have to mention here, right? We always have to see where today fits in the historical context, right? To understand where Hungary comes from. We came out of World War II with a really big trauma, and we also have to take into account the effects of deindustrialization after communism. Now let me turn to Bálint Ablonczy and ask him the same question. That spatial interpretation of the results, if we base ourselves on territory, is that
Köszönöm szépen a szót, és akkor elérkeztünk az este ahhoz a részéhez, ahol elindul a vita. Én nagyon felületes olvasatnak tartom azt, amit Erőss Gábortól hallottunk. Tehát ha valaki megnézi az adatokat, tényleg csak annyiban, amennyire az elmúlt másfél nap lehetőséget adott, egyáltalán nem azzal a mindent megmagyarázó területi elvvel találkozik, amit itt hallottunk. Hadd hozzak konkrét példákat, én kiírtam magamnak, meg is jelent nálunk egy cikk erről most frissen az oldalunkon, hogyan nőtt a Fidesz szavazat aránya a jól teljesítő metropoliszokban, nagyvárosokban, vagy az ország tehetősebb részein. Az a helyzet, hogy mindenütt nőtt a Fidesz. Tehát Budapesten például 3%-ra, 41%-ra fölment. Valóban az ellenzék megnyerte a kerületek jelentős részét, de még a legbaloldali kerületekben is, ha vannak magyarok a teremben, akkor Pest-Erzsébet, Kispest, másokat lehet mondani, ahol nagyon komolyan csökkent a baloldalra szavazók aránya. Budakeszi-Budaörsi körzet, ez a magyar női, mondom a francia vendégeinknek, vagy barátainknak, ahol egy nagyon ismert zöld baloldali politikus, Szél Bernadett kapott ki a fideszes kihívójától. A legnagyobb győzelmet, ahol több mint 50% volt a Fidesz és a második helyezett ellenzéki politikus között, azt Nyugat-Magyarország egyik legtehetősebb körzetében érte el a Fidesz. Tehát szerintem itt ebben, amit hallottunk, persze vannak igazságmagok, de szerintem nagyon sok önfelmentés is van. Tehát a dolog mégiscsak úgy áll, amit itt már hallottunk korábban, hogy a pálya lehítése mellett azért meg kell nézni, hogy 18-as adatokhoz képest 900 000 szavazat eltűnt az ellenzéktől. A pálya ugyanígy lejtett 18-ban is. Tehát szerintem itt azért nagyon komolyan fel kell tennie magának a kérdést, az ellenzéknek azt a kérdést, hogy mi is történt. Nincs olyan település típus, ahol nem nőtt volna a Fidesznek a szavazati aránya, a Fideszre szavazóknak a száma. Tehát itt azért szerintem ez a vesztesek, nyertesek, város, vidék, én ezt egy olyan szembeállításnak érzem, ami nem kellő mélységgel magyarázza meg, talán az említett a hozott példák alapján látható, hogy nem kellő mélységgel magyarázza meg, hogy mi történt. Én sokkal inkább a felé tapogatnék, a nyelv kérdése felé, tehát hogy a nyelv és a történet. Tehát a Fidesznek van egy nyelve és van egy történet az országról. Kik vagyunk, mit akarunk, hova megyünk. Ezt, és itt talán a finoman polírozott politikusi megszólalásokban hallatszódott, ez egész egyszerűen ez a nyelv és ez a történet nem létezett az ellenzéknél. A másik történet a stabilitás kérdése. Nagyon és itt megint volt erre utalás, hogy a magyar társadalom, közép-európai társadalom többségéhez hasonlóan egy mélységesen traumatizált társadalom a 20. század következtében. Elképesztően sok trauma történt Magyarországon, első világháború, második világháború, holokauszt, a kommunizmus rengeteg problémája, 89, ami mégiscsak, nem szoktunk róla beszélni, szabadságot hozott, de hát néhány hónap alatt 1 millió ember veszítette el Magyarországon az állását. Ez egy elképesztő sok volt, tehát egy ilyen kontextusban, és különösen egy háborús kontextusban a stabilitás az mindenek fölött érvényesül. Egész egyszerűen az emberek azt gondolták, hogy nagyon jelentős részben éppen ma olvastam egy érdekes beszámolót egy ellenzéki terepen dolgozó aktivistától, aki kopogtatott, és nem a Fideszre szavazók hozták föl neki azt a kérdést, hogy háborúval kapcsolatos problémák miatt, meg a stabilitás hiánya miatt nem fognak az ellenzékre szavazni, hanem az ingadozó, a bizonytalan szavazók mondták azt ennek az ellenzéki aktivistának, hogy nem tudnak erre az ellenzéki koalícióra szavazni. Talán már volt is utalás arra egy korábbi megszólalásban, hogy a baloldali szavazók egy jelentős részében is komoly kérdések voltak a baloldali koalícióval összefüggésben. Tehát összefoglalva itt a rövid 5 perces megszólalásba, én felületesnek tartom azt a mondást, hogy itt vesztesek, nyertesek problémáját látjuk. Szerintem az amerikai, meg Brexit, meg számos nyugat-európai analógia kevéssé működik, és szerintem nagyon komolyan föl kell tenni a nyelv, a történet és a vezetési hitelesség kérdését az ellenzéknek, ha valóban ki akar mászni abból a csávából, amiben van. Nyilván a pálya lejtésével kapcsolatos kritikákban, egyebekben, amiket hallottunk, ezzel együtt valóság, sok igazság van, de mondom, önmagukban ezek nem magyarázzák a 18 és 2022 között megtörtént drámai változást. Tehát ez egy 900 000 szavazat egy ilyen rendszerben, az rengeteg, az nagyon sok, és nem pusztán arról van szó, hogy a Jobbiktól elmentek mondjuk a Mi Hazánkba, tehát szélsőjobboldali pártba, vagy otthon maradtak, vagy Fideszre szavaztak. Ha elkezdjük nézni a szavazókörök adatait, még ennél is összetettebb képet kapunk arról, hogy az ellenzéki szavazók nem csak a jobbikosok egy részben eltűntek, ez nem mobilizálható állapotban. Köszönöm szépen.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir, for your analysis. Now, let me give the floor to Mr. Válasz Online. So he is a former student of the Center for European Studies that merged with Sciences Po a few years ago.
Au sein de notre école. Par rapport à cette victoire électorale qu'on peut qualifier finalement d'éclatante, puisque vous améliorez vos résultats par rapport à la précédente législature, j'aimerais vous poser deux questions. Il y a des questions de programme et de qualité des programmes. Et selon vous, quelles ont été les mesures finalement de votre programme qui ont réussi à mobiliser pas seulement votre électorat, mais aussi une partie des électeurs relatifs finalement qu'on a évoqué il y a quelques minutes. Et puis la deuxième question, de l'ordre de la sociologie électorale, dans quelle mesure avez-vous réussi à attirer une partie de la jeunesse hongroise? On associe généralement le Fidesz et dans son ADN une partie de la jeunesse qui s'est constituée à la fin des années 80, au début des années 90. Est-ce qu'il a réussi à attirer ces jeunes hongrois?
So, did you manage to attract the younger generation, and how can you explain that?
Il va former un duo avec Edith Boot, chercheuse en sciences politiques, et j'aimerais interroger Madame Boot sur ce qu'elle qualifie de pouvoir informel du Fidesz,
Analyst, so I want to ask her about the informal power of Fidesz, that capacity they have, that ability to mobilize really the whole district.
Cette capacité qu'a le Fidesz finalement à capter ses électeurs
get the voters through what you call informal power. First of all, let me give the floor to the first speaker.
Pour cette invitation. C'est un plaisir d'être ici. Je vais parler en anglais, je pense. J'hésitais un petit peu, mais peut-être que c'est la langue que
I think I will speak English. I was not sure, but it might be the best language here that everybody understands.
You've asked me two questions. One was about program. The second one was about the young people and youth and how much we believe they support us. But first of all, let me say that it's humbling to win for a fourth consecutive time such a landslide victory. And many of my colleagues have said from various perspectives this already, but in every single social strata or group, in every single type of settlement, including Budapest, where we didn't do so well, we have increased considerably the vote and the support for Fidesz. This is the single largest victory at democratic elections in Central Europe or in the European Union, I think, since 1989. So it's a major achievement, and it's obviously feels very good, and it's an enormous sense of responsibility also. Many things have been said before me, partly by analysts, partly by my political opponents. There was one person from Budapest who was introduced as socio, I think, but he really is, I think, deputy mayor in a Budapest city, so he belongs actually to the opposition. He's an opposition politician. He actually didn't say that, but perhaps it's some information that's relevant. Also, I could react to many of the things they have said, but perhaps later, because let me just say this, because I cannot not say this at least, that so far what I've heard from the panelists here, from Budapest as well as from here, just confirms to me that there is a stunning degree of a lack of understanding of Hungarian society and reality in Central Europe and Hungary from their part. And I believe that if they continue like this, with things like what my fellow deputy said in the beginning, Orbán, and Putin and all that, if they continue like this, if they remain in this fictional bubble of reality that they have created for themselves, then I'm calm, because then we're going to win a landslide for years from now, for sure. If they continue like this. So it's okay. But it's unbelievable to me that there is such a degree of a lack of self-reflection even after such a devastating failure. But okay, it's up for them. Now, you've asked me about the program. Right. Now, we've been in government for 12 years. And so it's quite a time, a period. And it's difficult to speak briefly about the program. But the most important logic, political logic in the Orbán governments and the Fidesz governments has been a focus on Hungary and on Hungarian interests. I could say Hungary first, if you want it in a short version. When we began governing in 2010, we inherited a country basically destroyed by the previous socialist liberal coalition government. A country that was bankrupt, a country that had moral crisis, that had street violence, where people had high taxes and were indebted, etc. And we could have continued with failed policies of asking people to pay more, for instance, the usual advice from the IMF and this kind of stuff. And instead of that, there was a completely new political logic introduced, where we said, are we going to ask for some time extra contribution from wealthy foreign investors, foreign groups? We're going to ask for extra contribution by banks, so that we can bring the budget to a balance, that we can quickly end the IMF, and Hungary had to turn to the IMF before, because we send them home relatively soon. We cut taxes, we have introduced a flat tax, and we've stuck to it. We've created jobs, etc. I could continue for a long time, but it's a policy of economic strength, of growth that has been continuous, basically. And the policy that's focusing on our own interests as opposed to expectations from elsewhere. It's a vision for Hungarian sovereignty, of decisions for ourselves, even if those decisions are not popular, are not easy to make. So when, for instance, there was the extreme migration pressure following 2015, and this whole, now we can clearly say, mistaken policy or decision by Merkel to let everybody who wanted to come, and this way mixing up refugees with economic migrants and strengthening illegal entry into the European Union, which is obviously not a terrible situation, was a bad decision. We stood against that, and at first we were the only one. The Prime Minister was the only one. Now, the mood has changed quite a bit. And actually, we're proving, it's a tragic circumstance, obviously, but we're proving now with welcoming over 600,000 Ukrainian refugees into Hungary, what the difference is between a refugee who needs help and has a right to be helped, and we're doing that now, and an illegal economic migrant who is aggressive against border police.
Another important element of the program, I know I need to be short, but it's a long period of time that we're talking about. Another important element is the focus on family support, a focus on traditional values, a focus on helping marriages and giving a lot of economic advantages to young couples, to make government policy in a way that would help young couples to bear children, to have that and to take that as a value. Whereas in today's world, it's not the most popular or expected attitude or value system. We know that in Europe, but that again is an area where we believe it's the right thing, it's an important thing to fight for. And I can continue. So it's a policy that is focusing on us and that wants to listen to the people and does a lot to do that. We're often criticized, and I've heard here and there criticisms of how the scene was not balanced, or the media, etc. The advertisements. The government in Hungary advertises, and we're proud to do that. The government communicates. It talks to people. We organize national consultations. It's often ridiculed by my opponents as well. They're not really questions. It's a waste of money. No, it's not a waste of money. It's asking people's opinion. It's putting an emphasis on having a dialogue even between elections, not only every 4 years when we are curious about what people think. It seems to me the opposition is more following the other way. It's a good investment, and it's actually taking democracy seriously and using now modern technology as well as more traditional ones. The second question was about young people. Fidesz support is pretty even, actually. It's obviously hard to exactly say because voting was secret. There will be post-election surveys which will ask that, and we've had that for previous elections. They consistently show that there is a strong support. In fact, the last one I saw showed us the largest support of young voters, depending on how you categorize young. But it's a pretty even support, and we've done a lot, in fact, to have young people in our past years of government. So I hope it will continue. This is what the numbers also seem to show with the results.
Merci beaucoup pour cette analyse.
Well, thank you very much for this analysis. This obviously anticipates in the long run over and above elections after communism, the financial crisis in 2008. And we tend to forget it, but it had a major impact on Hungarian society. It's important to recall that and how the medium term and the long term sort of dovetail. I'd like to give the floor now to Fidesz with the Warsaw University. The idea was to ask you to explain what we understand by this informal or soft power that Fidesz has, to try and explain this electoral success and how well they're rooted in Hungarian society.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you, Bernard. I'm also going to stick to English for the benefit of all speakers and audiences. So many things have been said, and it's very tempting to respond to each and every point, but what I'm going to do is to backwardly assessing a bit the electoral results so that I can unpack the concept of informal power and connect the dots. So I agree with those assessments that they are claiming that the United Opposition failed to reach out to its own electorate, and I think there are huge issues here because not only they were not able to find a coherent and unified message, but I think probably it makes sense to try to find conclusions and figure out whether there was enough intellectual clarity to try to undercut the very logic of toxic polarization, which is undergoing in Hungary since Fidesz came to power again in 2010. And I don't think they could. And I think it's also fair to raise the question whether when we have a so ideologically diverse like a political playing field, I mean parties, whether it makes sense to push them to lock their electorate into one, so to say, cage. As Bálint pointed out, that's definitely something worth discussing. But I think it's a dilemma which is not only a dilemma here, but also in Poland, where we've been witnessing a very similar initiative in 2019 during the European parliamentary elections, where the opposition was uniting, but they were not able to keep PIS off balance of power, but although that was not like that much large margin than here. The second contributing factor to this surprisingly big supermajority I wanted to mention or reflect on is, and I think it has a lot to do with the demand side of things and the social preconditions, is that the opposition would need to face that Viktor Orbán is it's just, you know, resonates a lot better with electoral grievances, perfectly understands the soul of the Hungarian nation, in a sense that he was capable of successfully exploiting identity and existential-based anxieties. His campaign was very much centered around that. Imagine the Maslow pyramid. So his campaign was very much centered around the very bottom of the political Maslow pyramid, meaning responding to the needs when it comes to, you know, cheap food, cheap electricity, security. So all this kind of issues, and these patronizing measures that he came up with, or that the campaign came up with, I think it provided a very extra layer of comfort, not only to the most marginalized groups in Hungary, as it has been discussed, but it also resonated very well within the wealthier strata of the society, because of this, if we can say, 9/11 moment of Central and Eastern Europe about what's happening in Ukraine right now. So this kind of rally around the flag effect, I think it worked pretty well in each and every strata of the society. And yes, so we can stipulate that Viktor Orbán has a huge popular support, but I think this is pretty much only one side of the coin, because the regime, as it has been developed in the last 12 years, it also got into the point where it also manipulated the system to, so to say, pretty much like unbeatable electoral majority. I think it's fair to say that. And in order to do that, it was employing both legal, formal, and informal power techniques. And this is where I'm getting into the very concept of informal power, to put together the dots. The legal toolkit is widely known. Everybody is aware of the fact how many times the Hungarian government has been amending the constitution in order to capture the referees, to hollow out democratic institutions, and so forth. I'm sure you're all familiar with this data. I think what is a little bit like less well known is the way how the government is very successfully informally undermining democracy and employing informal power. What's happening firstly is that the government is, so first of all, on paper, very often everything looks okay. There's a supermajority, laws are being like, you know, accepted and pushed through according to the book, or more or less according to the book. But at the end of the day, these laws are very often being instrumentalized. And to give you one example, we have a pretty solid criminal law, like a criminal code. But the problem is, at the end of the day, when it comes to law enforcement, it's hugely selective. So systemic corruption related to the family and the cronies and the corrupt networks of Viktor Orbán is interestingly not being investigated, or very minimally being investigated. When it comes to any issues, when it comes to dissidents, these authorities are like jumping the gun right away, and there's, you know, no problem at all at the end of the day. So the problem with this informal power is that this regime is very successfully tilting the playing field through organizational and electoral clientelism. It has been mentioned before that it has been, you know, the issue is systemic corruption. They monopolize the state, the media, the billboard market, which has a serious implication on the fairness of the elections at the end of the day. So they have created parallel power structures through which they could secure power. And what's, I think, most important, and this is the point with which the opposition is, I think, struggling the most to catch up, not like catch up with, but to countermeasure, is that they're waging permanent civil war on dissidents 24/7 for 10 years, paid by taxpayers' money. I am a former editor of state public media. I have been working there between 2010 and 2014. So I have been witnessing from within how they have distorted the very principles of independent journalism, the very principle of reporting the news, or at least giving the opportunity for the opposition to provide their ideas and narratives. This is a very anti-pluralistic and very anti-democratic way of delegitimizing dissidents, and the very lack of mutual toleration when it comes to democratic values. And I think this is something which is certainly need to be taken into consideration when we're assessing the elections, because it's an institutional and environmental factor which has an impact on the outcome. So as for electoral clientelism, and I'm going to conclude here, Gábor Erőss mentioned the eastern part of Hungary and the issue of vote buying, and we have a robust empirical research data showing that Fidesz could actually create, not only successfully respond to this kind of grievances, very often in a very legitimate way, but at the same time created massive social dependencies within the society when it comes to the most marginalized and most deprived strata of the society, in particular the Roma community. And we have quantitative research data that shows that a couple of programs that they further developed. It's not an invention of the Orbán government, but it has been inherited from the former government, but have been further developed, is the workforce program, for instance, which is a heavily over-politicized tool in the hands of the government in order to intimidate and very often coercively buy votes of the most marginalized people. And the research data that we have so far shows that around 2014, it secured 5-6 extra mandates for Fidesz. So what I'm saying is that the bottom line is that not only the institutional and financial preconditions are being distorted, but also I think we can say that the social preconditions are being impacted by that. This is very disturbing, and I think it really raises the issue and the question to how much, to which extent elections are unfair and to which extent they're manipulated. And I will stop here because I'm sure we're going to have a chance to discuss that.
Merci beaucoup pour cet éclairage.
Well, thank you for this analysis. And you mentioned a number of techniques or methods deployed on the verge of what's formal and informal. We'll now close this panel on the analysis of the electoral results. I'll give the floor to Bernard Guetta, and he'll give the floor to more guests. Yes, the third is Hungary tomorrow. What will happen? What are the choices that Hungary will make in the political sphere, in international relations?
Je voudrais d'abord interroger
I'd like to give the floor to Bálint. She's my colleague, twice my colleague, because an MEP and a member of my political group, the group Renew. And we're both very happy to be a member of Renew, at least I am. The question I would like to ask you, Kathleen, is the following. We heard somebody say that the opposition isn't interested enough in people's daily problems, issues such as health and education. Do you share this point of view? In Momentum or in other opposition movements, have you begun to draw up specific proposals? And do you think that this is a way out or a way in, as you may put it, into the future East? I'd like to hear you on this question, and also the only majority party representative. You had the floor earlier, Mr. Hidvigi, but I'll give you the floor again on this precise question. You were criticized for not investing into the health system and education system sufficiently. Do you think that's fair? Will you change that? Will it be one of the future priorities? And then there's another major chapter, and that's international relations that Hungary entertains. We have a very important guest who's well aware of these matters. Mr. István Szent-Iványi was the opposition candidate's advisor, and we'll ask him whether Hungary can sort of remain on the fence between Moscow and Brussels, and will the difficulties increase between Brussels and Budapest? Or, and I was just going to say something really silly, but the thing I noticed, Mr. Orbán, will he be more flexible in his relations with Brussels and try and strike a deal with Brussels? And I will ask all of you, insofar as you want to take the floor to answer, to give us your opinion on whether the illiberal movements in Hungary will grow in strength. Is Mr. Orbán right to say that his model in Hungary is a model for the future beyond Hungary, for Europe at large or the world? Katalin, I suggest we start with you. There were questions on investments, the health system, the education system. Should that be your future priority?
Thank you very much. First of all, to Bernard and Droit for having me here. I will also speak in English. Maybe that's the best middle ground here. I didn't get the floor in the first round, so I would like to just make a very short remark here, which will also intertwine with the rest of what I'm going to say. So this election was a disaster for the opposition. We lost heavily. We are responsible for this, and we shouldn't judge the responsibility to one party or the other party or the leader. We were all in this together. We campaigned together. We took the opportunity together to run as a coalition, and I suppose every single party has to draw the conclusions that what was the result of this devastating loss from our end. Because we made mistakes. Of course, there are a lot in the system that I should and I will criticize. But as a disclaimer, I would like to start that I am not going to blame everything on the Fidesz media.
Nous n'avons plus le son, le Zoom.
Sorry? I'm sorry, I thought that somebody is going to.
No. Can't hear.
Who is talking?
We are a responsible party here. And yes, the system is unfair. And what this, colleagues told the public about the billboards, the very heavy representation of government opposed to the opposition, the lack of media space, the lack of debates are a very essential part for this. It very heavily tilted the playing field, but it's true that Fidesz won very clearly. It seems that their campaign worked better than our campaign. Having said that, I don't want to criticize your campaign based on if it was successful or not, because it clearly worked. But I would like to just criticize it on the basics, whether it was ethical or not. And the question is about social policies. You said a very nice speech here, Balázs. I think it was interesting, right? Like those people who were sitting in the room, if they don't know the reality on the ground, they might have been like, that's like, so interesting policies. Yeah, tax cuts, great.
So my question is just that if you have all these achievements that you are clearly proud of, why couldn't we have a debate on this during the
opportunity to get early election campaign? Why your campaign was basically only about how to trash and blame the opposition and the opposition leader with like completely made up claims? Why didn't you have billboards which advertised what good you did for the country, what social policies you enacted, or what tax cuts did you implement, or what your plan is for the future? Why your billboards were about completely like made up lies where you claim that the opposition leader would like close down hospitals or would send our kids to war? It's like clearly not true. You know it, I know it, everybody knows it, and you just used this huge advantage you had to a completely unethical cause. Did it work? Yes. Do I think it helped our society as a whole? I think it really put a very, very big division in the middle of our already divided society. It just like dug the ground even deeper between the two camps, and I think it's like extremely unhealthy. And I'm quite sure that so many of our future problems will stem from this division that we have in society. But yes, to answer your question, clearly we didn't get through this wall that was in front of us, the wall of the media, the wall of the tilted playing field, and then probably also some of the characteristics of our coalition. To speak to the heart of people. We have teachers on strike. We have very small conditions in terms of the healthcare system. You claim that the opposition will make privatize healthcare. Well, yet in the very same time, if you want to get an appointment for a CAT scan or an MRI, you either wait half a year in the public system or you go to the private and pay hundreds of euros. We should have thought more about this. We should have thought more about this. And I think one of the conclusions that we have to draw is that maybe it's not the best angle
attack a right-wing government
from the right end. I think in the future we should absolutely take on board the real small bread and butter issues of the community much more. We
need to talk about more direct.
We talked about a lot. And we talked about a lot, and we had a policy program. It was a very clear proposal compared to the Fidesz proposals, which maybe some of you knew it, but clearly it wasn't shown for the wider public.
I wish we could.
I wish we could debate this. I wish we could have had a TV debate on this. Like not you and me, of course, but Mr. Orbán and Mr. Márki-Zay, as they do in every country. So that you could defend your policies and we could also pose our case and let the people decide. We should have done it. But this is not an equal situation. I think our policies were there. We couldn't communicate it well enough, and this is our responsibility. But I mean, just please consider, we have to live in this country together. 10 million people. We are a small country. We are landlocked. We depend on each other. How is it that you and me could have a perfectly nice and proper conversation in Parliament?
Why is it that
your party tells that
voters of my party are traitors
of the country? Why couldn't we have a discourse and a dialogue about socialist issues, about the future of our country? Why do we have to hate each other so much? I don't really think that this is bringing us forward, and maybe this is not the way we should be conducting politics. Maybe this is successful, but I really do not agree with these methods.
Merci, Catherine. Merci, Catherine.
Thank you, Kathleen. It was quite moving.
Can I respond to this? I don't know how to read the questions, but it's an important point. It was heartwarming. But, frankly, looking at the aggression and very often the vulgarity of the opposition demonstrations, slogans during the past couple of years against us, against the Prime Minister, especially, it's strange to be listening to this. You know,
if you look at a campaign,
you obviously contrast things in the campaign. We didn't actually have to make up anything. We used most of the time quotations from the leader of the opposition.
He has said so many things.
He has said so many things, and then the opposite of them, and a correction and an explanation that actually was quite easy. to just quote most of the time what he said. And every member of the opposition in parliament has had 4 years. Every single month, the prime minister goes in for prime minister's questions personally, and they have long debates and long exchanges. So to say that there was no debate, well, the televised debate of one candidate against another is one method. It's not a compulsory method in any campaign. And actually, we haven't really spoken about it here, and I'm not sure how much it's relevant or how much time we have for it. But there's also the factor of how the opposition coalition is still dominated by Ferenc Gyurcsány, the former prime minister who led the country to a disaster between 2010 and who has decided not to leave. He's still there. You cannot spit him out, you cannot swallow him, he's still there. He dominates your side, it's a fact. And perhaps you should look at that if you want to look for the real causes of why you keep failing as elections.
Are there any other guests that would like to react, whether here around the table or from Budapest? Maybe for you, Katalin, maybe one of our guests from Budapest. I don't know if you're still with us. No? Well, Katalin, please go ahead. Yes, yes, I am here. Oh.
Yeah, just a minute. Juste un instant. Kathleen répond.
Just a minute. Katalin will answer and then you will get the floor.
Yes. Okay, so just a very quick reaction, and I'm so sorry, but what does Ferenc Gyurcsány's role in this coalition have to do with the fact that Viktor Orbán hasn't debated anybody since 2006, and he has not debated one time the leader of the opposition who was selected in a democratic way, a primary election, against the wife of Ferenc Gyurcsány? What does your statement that yes, Mr. Gyurcsány is in the coalition, what does it have to do with the fact that there is no debate? And also you say that you didn't make up anything. Well, if you turn on the Hungarian public broadcaster, why do you have to put on like so-called experts who compare Mr. Zelensky to Hitler? What does it have to do with reality? Why do you give platform to people who deny the existence of Ukraine as a country? Really, why don't you put somebody there who talks about like your social places or text places? You don't have to, of course, and it's heard and won and congratulations on it, but why? Seriously, what is the rationale behind this?
Just very briefly, we're not putting anybody on public television to say anything. Public television invites whoever they want to invite. I mean, it's a false reality that you're talking about. It's a makeup. You know, it doesn't happen that way. Again, just perhaps a better understanding of reality would help a better election result. If you keep running after fantasies, you end up having few votes usually.
Gábor, c'est à vous. Si vous êtes là, vous êtes là.
Oui, voilà, merci. Donc, je vais essayer d'être bref. Juste
Thank you. I will try to keep it short, just to answer quite quickly.
Je crois qu'il a également compris.
I think I was misunderstood. Maybe that was a problem of translation. What I was trying to say is that the opposition suffered a huge defeat. That's not a question here. I was trying to analyze the evolution of the results, but he took a counterexample of a district that lost its voter base, but that's among the districts that went that didn't go down too far compared to 2018. So we analyzed the 8th district of Budapest, voting station by voting station. So we really wanted to see the shifts in voting habits, and the more affluent the district, the higher the vote from the opposition, and it has even evolved positively. And if you go to poor districts, well, the opposition went down. So we won that constituency that used to be Fidesz, but when you look in details, you see that that gap is just growing between those that vote in favor of an authoritarian regime, but well, maybe they don't feel too concerned about it, but for a neoliberal and conservative regime that hasn't raised family allowances for 12 years. So it would be in the best interest to vote for us, but they did not do that. So we realized that the vote had a cultural component to it, and that's why I used the analogy I used. So middle class and upper middle class will not be enough to win the next elections. The conclusion is, well, it's really self-criticism on my part, on our part. The conclusion is both hard and quite obvious because the opposition from the left didn't really get good results, but we have to talk directly to the working class, to those people who live in poverty, and we have to send them that message to make sure it goes through to them. It was in our program, but maybe we didn't talk about it enough. It's not in their best interest to have a government that doesn't raise family allowances, that taxes low incomes. No, it's in their best interest to have a government that increases low incomes and increases family allowance. And you were talking about family allowance, and I am ashamed as someone coming from the middle class. I benefited from those family allowances. I am ashamed to see the reduction of income tax for the middle class. And now people are not voting according to their economic situation. They are voting according to questions of identity, cultural identity. Sorry, and my friends in my bubble.
On vous entend pas. Bon, j'ai arrêté. Ok, merci.
He's done. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, it was interesting and very telling. It's an incredible disrespect towards the people. People will vote the poorer ones, less educated ones, as well as the more educated ones. All the people, they will vote against or according to their interest and conviction. Don't look down on people. We introduced the program of public labor, for instance. You have a lot of people of wrong origin, for instance. We introduce them into the labor market, and these are facts that we've done, and people appreciate that. So just try to get out of the bubble.
Juste une minute, parce que monsieur avait demandé la
because he had asked, I don't think there was any translation problem.
Okay, pardon. Sorry, I will switch to English and just a very brief response to some of the things we've heard here. Balázs, the public broadcasting in Hungary is functioning from 100 billion Hungarian forints. I calculated 300 million euros per annum from Hungarian taxpayers' money. And you are saying that the public broadcasters are there to call in and interview whoever they want. I don't think you understand the basic concept of public broadcasting. Public broadcasting's duty and responsibility, since they are financed from Hungarian taxpayers' money, mine also, yours also, to invite in everyone who has something to say and who is a Hungarian political player in the field. So I don't think you understand the basic concept of public broadcasting. I'm the second person of until recently the second largest opposition party in Hungary. The last time I was in MA, the Hungarian public broadcasting was 8 years ago. And I cannot name a single other opposition politician who has made it to the public broadcasting unless they climbed over a fence when we were protesting in front of the Hungarian public broadcasting blocks and buildings. So I think the issue of media information and public broadcasting is at the heart of understanding what went wrong in Hungary under 12 years of Fidesz government. The question of Ferenc Gyurcsány. I'm not the greatest proponent of Ferenc Gyurcsány's governance and government. I'm one of the greatest critics of his years in government. I will finish, Balázs, and then you can react to that. If you have made very serious claims against this Gyurcsány, you have called everyone an agent of Ferenc Gyurcsány, you have tried to portray as if he would be at the center of the whole alliance and moving everything, everyone, and he's the one pulling the strings in the opposition. If your claims are correct, you have been in power for 12 years, with two-thirds majority for almost all that time. If you have an accusation, then why did you bring him to trial? Why didn't you accuse him of what you accuse him of all the time and take him to jail? If you say he has nothing to do in Hungarian politics, then do it. Make your claims clear and take him to trial. But what you are doing, I think, is nothing more than political manipulation with Ferenc Gyurcsány and with all the political players who you call your opponents.
Oui, juste une petite remarque. Je pense pas
I just wanted to make a comment. I don't really think that there was a problem with translation because I really understood. I just wanted to say that this argument, according to which the poor should have voted for us and they didn't.
Je pense qu'il y a un problème de connaissance de la société hongroise. Si les gens sont intéressés par des questions d'identité, alors il faut leur parler des questions d'identité.
If people are really interested in matters relating to identity, then obviously that needs to be debated. Health and education as well. This patchy coalition did not mention all these issues either. So if you look at the figures,
mais en ce qui concerne
les
votes des catégories sociaux, Fidesz domine
in the various social categories. Fidesz comes out first almost everywhere in each category, geographically, age-wise, social, professional categories. So I find it very difficult to follow when you say who should vote for whom, and when they don't do it, then it's your opponent's fault that they did. No, that I didn't say.
D'apporter une analyse sociologique
pour montrer provide a sociological analysis of what happened. People don't necessarily vote by virtue of their income or economic situation, but also by virtue of other criteria, and that may explain this result. Very well. In a nutshell, because we still want to deal with international politics and relations.
I will.
Yes.
I will react. Martin, Fidesz is not invited in the public television all the time either. The television covers internal politics, public television I'm talking about, internal politics, with roughly 1/3 time dedicated to government decisions, government communication, and then the rest of the time divided between opposition forces and government parties or government coalitions through Bálint Ablonczy. Well, that's the fact. And it's not only opposition figures who are invited to during the campaign to present a party program. It's the same rule for Fidesz. The fact of the matter is that what is in Hungary in the media spectrum is a much more balanced media than many media spectrums in Western Europe. In that sense, there's more validity to express opinions. There are fewer taboos, and it's unusual today. And we could talk about that, and it's a large and very important topic. And it's related to actually, I think, the last point that you wanted to raise. But that's the reality. It's a balanced one, and it's not only public television, by the way, that makes it that is so important. There are a number of other TV channels, internet, etc. So all kinds of information and visions were plainly available to Hungarians for a long time. So it was a decision based on a lot of choices and a clear picture.
Merci.
Very well. Well, we'll now move on to another very important matter. Neoliberal future, relations with the rest of the European Union. And I'd like to give the floor for an introduction to this topic to Mr. Szent-Iványi, who's a diplomat and a former MEP.
Where is he?
Vous avez la parole. The floor is yours.
Köszönöm szépen a szót, és köszönöm a meghívást. Megengedik, akkor magyarul.
Thank you for giving me the floor, and I'd like to reply in Hungarian. About Hungarian foreign policy, it's based on a false strategic choice, which is illiberalism. And at the beginning of this thought, there's Putin, and he handed it over to us, and Orbán accepted it. It's illiberalism because the Western world, according to this view, is losing its senses, and that's the basis for this fraternity with Eastern dictatorships, those who represented this illiberalism. Putin, Xi Jinping, Erdogan, those are the three most important partners of Hungarian foreign policy. Russia's aggression on Ukraine is, of course, a problem for Eastern relations, although Orbán has never recognized it. It's a double-faced personality that we are being presented by Orbán, who doesn't seem to be able to accept the fact that he was wrong. He took the wrong turn. Hungary, after all, is a member state of the European Union, a member state of NATO, but for ideological reasons, there is a very tight relation with these three liberal countries. Hungary has several times used its veto to serve Russia's interest or Turkey's interest or China's interest, even inside NATO. Enhanced cooperation of NATO with Ukraine was not implemented because of that. And we know that that political line will not be held much longer. But Orbán obviously is a political chameleon, but somebody who's a carnivore never becomes a vegetarian, you see, and the leopard never really sheds its spots. Viktor Orbán will have to change somewhat, distance himself slightly also from these three illiberal countries. But for years now, his voters can see that his illiberal policy produces results. And before the elections, Orbán didn't want to upset the apple cart. He didn't want to change position. 44% of his voters believe that somewhere, somehow, the Ukraine is guilty of provoking the aggression, and it's not entirely Putin's fault if the war started. We are in the midst of Slavic countries, and we need to survive in this, and the liberal policies are the response we're provided. There seems to be some subtle confusion between aggressors and victims. This has been Orbán's official message for years now. Never has Orbán said that Russia should be criticized, that Russia is an aggressive country guilty of war crimes, even when he made his victory speech after the elections. Orbán mentioned President Zelensky, saying in a way that Brussels will be most surprised by the results of the election, and so Zelensky. It's a lot of public advertisement for Russia. On February 1st, Orbán went as Moscow's friend to see Putin and to discuss his the great friendship between Hungary and Russia. This was on the eve of the aggression. On February 13th, he repeated this. And just a few days before the aggression of Ukraine, the only foreign affairs minister in Europe to receive a very important order from the hands of Lavrov, the Russian foreign affairs minister, is Mr. Sigato, who is the Hungarian foreign affairs minister. A few sanctions have been accepted by Orbán, but he doesn't want to cut ties with Russia because the Hungarian nuclear power plant, PAX 2, is a plant which is Russian-made. It's a very important Russian investor who's at the basis of this project. So Orbán speaks of national security. In Budapest, there's a Russian bank which harbors spies that are everywhere. This bank is not able to set up shop neither in Slovakia nor in other neighboring countries. Only Hungary accepted this bank with open arms. Everywhere else, these spies were sent back, but not in Budapest. So we can't expect major changes to come, really. There are procedures underway for violation of the state of law rules, which may provide a few changes, perhaps on the margin, but not more. I don't believe in true changes anytime soon. Well, I have a simple question. Now that Putin is losing the war, can Viktor Orbán keep to his unchanged foreign policy or not? Yes or no? Can he or not?
We have supported every single common decision of the EU and of the NATO alliance in this war, and we're going to continue to do so.
That's one reply. Anybody else want to reply?
Yes, sure. Just very briefly, when we heard the statement of Balázs about Fidesz policy, he was talking about national interest and sovereignty, the importance of defending the Hungarian national sovereignty and the Hungarian national interest internationally, and putting Hungary first as opposed to expectations of others. I think these are very close to my heart, this concept. But I think after Vladimir Putin made it very clear in the middle of December in a letter written to the US and to NATO that he regards and considers not only the post-Soviet member states, ex-member states, part of the Russian sphere of interest, but the post-socialist bloc, including Hungary. I think on the same day, Viktor Orbán should have called Vladimir Putin to call off the meeting that he had scheduled for February and say that a sovereign country, which is defending national interests, cannot have nothing to talk to with the president or with a country that states that he considers Hungary to be its sphere of influence and is willing to interfere militarily to implement this policy. So I have a real problem, especially now that we have read that the Russian Secret Service was all over the Hungarian foreign ministry's internal communication for years, with the government knowing about it, but doing nothing to stop it, or doing nothing to call for help from the alliance that we are part of to help reject or push out the Russian spies from the foreign ministry's internal servers and internal communication. My question is, there's either a very serious lack of competence from the Hungarian government side, or this is the manifestation of high treason. I mean, you can choose, Balázs, what you think that this type of policy, where is the Hungarian national interest when Russia is running down the Ukraine? Do you want to be bored, right next to an aggressive Russia, a country which has suffered through 1956, a country which knows how Russia deals with international policy? It is our primary geopolitical interest to have Russia as far away from our borders as possible, and the easiest way of doing that is help Ukraine retain its territorial integrity as much as possible.
We have 5 minutes more. One sentence, please. Thank you for the lecture, Anton. It seems that hypocrisy knows no limits. I would just like to ask you, when you went to observe the referendum in Crimea,
I have never been to Crimea.
You went there as an election observer?
I did not.
You did not. Against the knowledge of everybody.
We understood it might be the Fidesz propaganda at its best. I have never been to the Crimea.
At that time, you were also as critical of Vladimir Putin and Russia as you seem to be now?
In 2014 and 15, we were worried for the Hungarian minority, which was suffering from the fact that the Ukraine has withdrawn the language law, and there have been militia marching up and down the Ukraine, threatening minorities, ethnic minorities. This was 8 years ago. We have made a policy statement in defense of the Hungarian minorities. Now the situation is rather different from that situation. We might acknowledge that the threat of a third world war and an outright war is somewhat different than the situation we
don't need lectures from you about defending the Hungarian minority in Transcarpathia. Right now, when Ukraine is impressed by Russia, we are not talking about that because we are helping the hundreds of thousands of refugees coming from Ukraine, and we're supporting every common decision, as I've already said. All the rest is fiction. I will give the floor to you.
Thank you. I just couldn't help myself but jumped in between these kind of political statements, and Just a couple of thoughts on the possible potential futures of Eurosceptic populism, which have been prevailed very successfully in the last 12 years in Hungary. I don't know how many of you have seen the victory speech of Viktor Orbán, which was given 2 days ago. I think it was quite indicative of the future of this kind of foreign policy directions. He's been naming the enemies that have been defeated, including the European Union, President Volodymyr Zelensky, and so on and so forth. So, long story short, a very short response to the question whether it's going to be changing or there is going to be any U-turn. I don't see how and why would the government would take a U-turn where they can simply maintain this kind of Eurosceptic populism in a sense that they can blame the decaying West for every hardship, while at the same time they can maintain developing business and economic possibilities and business opportunities with Russia. And what I wanted to mention is that why I stipulate a deepening tension between Hungary and the European Union is that it's quite difficult to procrastinate anything about the party program of Fidesz because it doesn't have such. What we can do is that we can give full credit for them because they're saying that Hungary is moving forward and then backward, meaning that if we have a look at the last 12 years, we can see the tendencies. What might possibly happen. So when it comes to the state of democracy and populism, I think what we could pretty much forecast is that there is going to be further going down the road of democratic backsliding. Public discourse is going to be restricted further. There has been this very interesting exchange about the state of public media, and I fully understand that Mr. Hidvégi has to stick to the party press talking points coming from Fidesz headquarters, but the reality is, and take it for granted because I have been working there for 4 years, the very basic principle of the state public media financed by taxpayers is to undermine the opposition and to depict every information which is coming from the opposition in a fully 100% negative context. Even if it's positive, it has to be reframed in a way that it's going to look good at the end of the day for the government. Long story short, as I mentioned, this is deeply populist, deeply anti-pluralist, and it has nothing to do with the basic democratic principles of mutual toleration and accepting each other as an equal, competent, like a competitive, it has nothing to do with competitiveness. So I think at the end of the day, we can go on and talk about what might happen to the remaining rest of part of the independent, general court system we're going to see. I don't want to procrastinate anything because we don't know, but based on the trends we have been witnessing, most likely the regime is going to proceed further with capturing the referees. And I don't think that the quality of the political discourse is going to be becoming any better because of what we have been witnessing and because of the distorted reality and the rejection of the facts, which we have just heard that according to Mr. Hidvégi, everything is fine, when it comes to the public sphere, which is not. And I'm afraid that this is going to put a lot more tension between Hungary and European Union in the rest of next couple of years. We have already witnessed that Article 7 has been triggered these days, and we're going to see what's next, but I don't expect anything backwards but forward in this regard.
Thank you, Edith. And conclusion to you, Kevin.
Okay, so yesterday and today I was asked the same question from many colleagues that what do we expect for the next government direction, and of course I'm so curious to see, but I can very much agree with the analysis that did that the prognoses are quite similar. And this is extremely scary for me, I have to say. You spoke a lot about national interests. And I do agree that there are a number of governments who have very particular national interests. They go to the council, they argue, they try to defend their points as much as possible, try to seek diplomatic solutions at the negotiating table. And I'm afraid to say that the direction that the Hungarian government has taken for the past decade is not this, but clearly the opposite. We are extremely isolated. And the best symbol for this, and I really am struggling how to understand, how is it serving the national interest that even the V4 countries, which were historically strong partners, the only remaining partners of Hungary, now transform into a V1. All the three other countries canceled meetings with Mr. Orbán ahead of the elections. Poland, which is a traditional ally, I think the last and the closest ally, is extremely critical of the foreign policy of the government. We are alone, and that really pains me to hear, even though I fundamentally disagree with most of the policy points of this government, but being a country of 10 million at the border of the EU, with such an open economy, the worst thing we can do is just to make enemies with everybody who is around us. And I really struggle to see why is it a national interest. And maybe another example for this, and I'm sorry to put a parliamentary example here as well, but the Fidesz delegation. You are 12. Many of you are very competent. I don't agree with you on basically anything, but you have good minds there. A lot of votes you received. Over half of the Hungarian voters voted for you at the next election. What are you doing? You are sitting as an independent. You cannot influence legislation. You can have speeches, great. But how is it serving the national interest that you are not in a political family? You don't have allies. Or the other example, recovery plan. We need the money so much. We are in an economic crisis in Hungary, and times ahead of us will be very difficult. Not only because of the government or the policies, but because of how the world looks like. We need this money so much. And according to my sources in the Commission, the Hungarian government just did not want to properly negotiate. You presented your plan, put it on the table. They said that, okay, this and this and this at that point needs correction. And the Hungarian negotiators say that, take it or leave it. As Hungary wouldn't need the money. I seriously do not understand. Why are you taking this track? If you want to enforce your ideas in a diplomatic way, fine. And I'm also not against trading with countries at the eastern part of the world. Of course, a lot of other countries are doing that. It's important. But Hungarian national interest, first and foremost for me, is to be as close and as allied to the European Union and to NATO as possible. And pointing fingers at Brussels, at the EU, at every single instance, you need to blame some internal policy failings or some global problem on somebody, or inventing ludicrous things like the transgender preschoolers or whatever your campaign was about. It's completely understandable. I don't think it's a national interest. So we should stick with our friends because as a community we are stronger.
Okay. Vous allez certainement poursuivre cette discussion au Parlement.
Well, I think you will most likely keep that discussion going during tomorrow's session at the Parliament, and I recommend you to do that. But if you would invite me in your conversation, I would be really glad. But now we have to thank our guests and the audience present here. Okay, so thank you to our audience present here. And really, let me give you the best compliment. You all taught me so much. You all helped me to understand so much. I thought I knew everything about Hungary, but I knew nothing. And I learned a lot. So thank you. Thank you very much to each and every one of you.
Merci d'être entré dans la fosse aux lions qui vous ont mangé. Et... Non, c'est vrai, c'était fort de votre part. Merci beaucoup.